Hi, everyone. Thank you so much to Michael for that wonderful introduction. I would also like to start off by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land that I'm coming to you from, which is the land of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. I'd like to pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging. And I'd also like to extend a warm welcome to any First Nations people who may be on this Zoom event today, and in particular, anyone with lived experience of disability. It was a real honour to be asked to be the keynote speaker today. I have to say I've got very big shoes to fill, given that I'm not a Paralympian. I think the only Paralympic thing that's in my life is sort of cooking and eating yummy food. But it's just been a total honour to be asked to be a part of your event today. I guess my story really begins with how I lost my vision. I was 6 months old and blood vessels burst in the back of my eyes and essentially detached my retinas. There is no formal medical name for what I have. It's simply known as a rare retinal abnormality. My brother has it as well. He was born 4 years after me, and the same sort of thing happened to him. 6 months old, blood vessels burst, detaching the retinas. Luckily for him, laser therapy had been brought about by then. And so doctors were able to salvage quite a huge portion of his sight. So he uses things like, very thick sort of glasses and enlarged print. That for me, I have no vision at all. I have some light perception and the ability to make out some shadows, but apart from that, nothing else. So some of you may be familiar with many of the doctors who we've dealt with and worked with over our time. Justin Playfair was a family favourite, and we also got to know Frank Martin very well in the early days. So I've also got a neurological condition called Charcot-Marie-Tooth, or CMT neuropathy, and that was diagnosed when I was about 10 years old. And it was really diagnosed because I was really struggling to read Braille. I was a really fast writer and quite a bright kid, but every time I sat down to read a book in Braille, I just struggled. I could never make out the words on the page. And so it took a couple of years before I was diagnosed, but essentially CMT affects the sensitivity, the muscle tone, and the balance in my hands, arms, legs, and feet. So to put it simply, I don't have enough feeling in my fingertips to feel Braille dots on the page. So if we take a couple of steps back, I started school quite early, about 3.5, 4 years old. My parents enrolled me into special school, and it was an hour away from my family home. They wanted me to go there. They'd heard it was sort of a really great school for vision impaired children, and there were some really brilliant vision impaired teachers there. So went off to that school, and I would get in a community bus every single morning on my own. I remember my mum always, putting me in the bus and waving goodbye and all that kind of thing. And I think really that made me the independent person that I am now, having done that so early on in life. And obviously it was a very big thing for my mum to do that. But really in the end, I think it really did set me on a path of independence. And I was really enjoying that school. I was learning how to swim. I was doing daily life living skills, learning things like how to tie my shoes up and using cutlery and cooking and all those bits and pieces. But then I was also doing the academic side of things with learning Braille and mathematics and all those kinds of things. And there was obviously the wraparound support that you would expect. There was the one-on-one sort of support when you needed it from teachers who knew about vision impairment and blindness, but there was also all the equipment we needed so that you could learn in a tactile way. But it really wasn't long until the teachers at that school really started encouraging my parents to have me transferred into mainstream education. And that was not a decision they took lightly. I know my mum in particular felt very nervous that I would fall behind, that there wouldn't be that support in mainstream education that I needed. She did worry that I'd be bullied. And I think really she worried that I just wouldn't get a good enough education because I'd somehow fall through the cracks or be forgotten. And so we started really slowly. we started with a number of different schools, trial and error, seeing which sort of school and teachers fit. And then when we sort of decided on a good one that was actually really close to my home, so it was a total opposite to what the special school was, we started sending me there 1 day a week, and then 2, and then finally it was 5 days a week. And this happened over quite a long period of time. It was a couple of years. And I'm actually quite grateful now looking back at that slow transition, because I think the one that really needed to go through the transition was my parents. It wasn't me. It was that they needed to feel really comfortable that I was in the right place and that I had all that I needed to kind of manage everything, and that my education would be given to me in a way that was accessible. So the school was really great, even though they hadn't had a lot of experience with kids with any disability at all. They were really approachable and open-minded and really consultative with my parents. There were meetings constantly, at the beginning and end of every term, where they would discuss what was going to happen, the types of classes and lessons and materials that I'd need, and any funding that I'd need. And obviously my mum fought very, very hard to have individualized funding for me, to make sure that any equipment I needed or hours for one-on-one support through a teacher's aide was all given to me. But that wasn't easy. And it wasn't throughout the whole 13 years of schooling. My mum had to constantly advocate for that. And at the end of each term, she also had meetings, because it was good to go back and say what worked, what didn't, and what would we do differently. And that she managed to do that. As intense as that was for parents who worked full time, she managed to do that right up until year 11 and 12. I think in year 11 and 12, I really started to kind of say, I don't need you in those meetings. I can really advocate for myself. And then I did have a support teacher who was with me in primary school when I first moved to the mainstream school. And to be honest, she wasn't very good. I was really struggling to read Braille, and she was supposed to be there to advocate for me and to be there for me. And yet she would often segregate me from the class. And because I was struggling so much to read Braille, I almost felt bullied into having to sit and even read a few pages, and she would make me sit there until I'd read every single word. And it would take hours, and it was stressful and depressing and really upsetting. And I would always end up in tears, and there would constantly be friction between herself and my parents, and also the class teacher, who really wanted me to be a part of the class, and who, at the time, my parents and the class teachers were saying, there's got to be something going on here. There's a reason why she can't read Braille. And, this itinerant support teacher would say things like that I was lazy, or that I needed to try hard enough, or that everyone was making excuses for me. And it was only then when I was 10, a couple of years later, that I was diagnosed with CMT, where we realized how wrong she was, and wrong in so many ways. Wrong to say all those things to me, wrong to deny my parents the opportunity just to go straight away and get tested. Because my parents trusted her. She was the one that knew vision impairment, not them. They'd never met anybody with a disability, let alone vision impairment. So they trusted her and her advice. And so obviously it was a double whammy not to be able to use Braille as a form of learning and have a vision impairment. But it was also an incredible turning point, because we got rid of her and got a brand new teacher that came to the school. And we also, that lesson really has stuck with me my whole life, because it's taught me that I need to advocate for myself, that I will never let anyone treat me like that, speak to me like that, and no one should. And so it was a really momentous kind of experience, I think, and really shaped who I am and the kind of advice that I give to other people now. So to kind of explain the difference, this new teacher arrived, and all of a sudden everything was going to be done through audio. I was given JAWS, the software that's loaded onto the computer, and it reads everything out aloud. I was given audiobooks. She would scan everything into electronic text. She enrolled me into different camps, which at the time I really didn't want to go to, but looking back, they were fantastic opportunities, because even though I went to mainstream schooling, which was absolutely the right decision that my parents made, but it was also good to go on these camps with places like Vision Australia, the Guide Dogs Association, and also St. Lucy's and St. Edmunds at the time, which catered mostly for vision impaired people. I'm not sure that those schools specialize in vision impairment anymore, but I think really going to those camps meant that I could meet other people who were vision impaired. I could learn lots of different skills that, some of my peers at the mainstream school didn't have to focus on so much. So it was a brilliant opportunity to have a sense of community with the vision impaired community, and then also to kind of, have that ability to go away from mum and dad for a week and do some awesome activities and really learn and grow and make new friendships without them kind of hovering, which was really nice. And I think that also really shaped my level of independence because, you were kind of forced to learn things, choose the movie, let's get on public transport. How do we figure out what we're going to have for dinner? How do we budget how much we've got to spend in the week? All of those bits and pieces. So the camps were really pivotal for me. And I think once we'd had me diagnosed with CMT and I had this new support teacher who came along to the school, I really started to thrive. I mean, before that, I was probably one of the lowest performing students in the class. And I think a lot of that stemmed from the fact that I felt quite depressed and upset that I wasn't doing well and that I felt bullied by this particular support teacher who everyone kept telling me was there to help, really, and she wasn't. And so then all of a sudden these new opportunities came up with new forms of technology, and they really changed my life. I essentially then ended up dux of my grade at the end of year 12 with the highest score that the school had ever received, and entry into a journalism degree at the University of Technology, Sydney. And I won't lie, it wasn't easy. I really put my head down and worked so hard in year 11 and 12 to get there. Even though I was a bright kid, academics wasn't, I wasn't it didn't come naturally. So I really had to try hard, and I'm so glad I did because it was always what I wanted to do. I think because radio was on in my house from the time I woke up to the time I went to sleep. I loved everything about the way people sounded and the things I could learn on radio. And I went and actually did 2 years of community radio as a teenager with my best friend. We hosted our own program, and that really gave me the opportunity to know that that's exactly what I wanted to do. And so then I went to UTS full time and studied. I was also doing internships at every sort of magazine and radio station and anyone that would have me, basically. And I was doing lots of different tasks, from making coffee to cleaning the fashion cupboard, right through to eventually writing articles and doing, grown-up journalism interviews. And so then I started looking for work. And of course, like most people with disability, I experienced huge amounts of discrimination. I took the personal decision never to disclose my disability because I had a huge portfolio of published work. I had a really good CV. I had 4 years of unpaid internships under my belt. I had great references from people in the industry. I didn't feel that my disability needed to be disclosed in an application because it wasn't necessary. Everything I had to prove that I could do the job was there. But when I walked into interviews and people would see my cane, they would realize that I was blind, and I faced a lot of really awkward interviews. Basically, it was, how the hell can you be a journalist when you can't see? People would say things like, we don't have a safe enough workplace for you. And all of that was really hard to handle. It was really depressing. And I'd sort of felt like, all my hard work had been for nothing. But then when I applied to the ABC, that was the first interview I went into where I was actually asked one really simple question, but it made the world of difference. And that was, what do you need to do your job as we expect anyone else to do it? And for me, that meant I could explain to them all the different technology that I used already, all the technology that I would bring with me or that they could purchase. And all of a sudden, I just knew I was in with, possibly in with a chance because they were open-minded. And it's almost been 10 years now that I've been at the ABC. So I'm really thrilled, and I have no plans to leave. It's been the most incredible organization to work for. And I've had a number of roles, first off in Sydney, and then working as a regional reporter in Bega, where there was no public transport. The nearest friends or family were a 6-hour drive away. It was really the opportunity where I got to live on my own, make new friends. I met my now husband down there, which means, that was a really special time, and Bega will always be a very special place. It's on the New South Wales far south coast. So you've sort of got coastline and snowy mountains, and it's a bit of paradise, which is really lovely. And then 7 years as a newsreader for Triple J. I mean, what more do you want when you're in your early 20s? And it was an opportunity to work with the technology team at the ABC and pioneer something that nobody had ever done before. There is no newsreader in the world who reads news live to air that we know of that also panels the desk. And so I got to kind of, come up with this new system with a brilliant team behind me, and we did it together, and it was a lot of trial and error, and it was not perfect in the beginning, but I think nothing ever is when you're trying something completely new that no one has ever done before. But I think in doing that, all of a sudden I was getting all these emails, and people were making contact with me all around the world, not just in Australia, people who had either wanted to be in the media but decided against it because it was so hard, and because they faced so many challenges, or because they didn't think they could, or they were told they couldn't, or from people who had taken a bit of motivation out of my story and who really wanted some advice on how to go about it. And I also realized that from the non-disabled community, I had all of this interest in how I worked. And I think for me, that showed the power of being able to change perceptions and shape the way people think about disability, which for so long has just been so negative, and so pity party. And then so after 7 years at Triple J, when I'd sort of had itchy feet and wanted to move on, I went into a board meeting one day and with the board at the ABC and pitched the idea of a disability affairs reporter round. And they committed to it straight away. And here I am 14 or 15 months later. And feels really silly to say this in my early 30s, but it is the best job I think I'll ever do. It's exhausting, but I get to meet incredible people. I get to support them to tell their stories. I get to put people with disability at the front and center of every story that I do. And they really dictate the kinds of issues that we write about, that we put to air. They have a national platform to do so. And we're changing the way that people think about disability. And for me, that's what I set out to do. And I couldn't be more thrilled to be the tiniest part of that, because it's not me that does it. I've got a brilliant team behind me, but I also have an incredible community, a community of 4.4 million Australians with disability. And it is something that we all do together. And feels really incredible to be able to be a part of that and to help others get their voice and their story out there. So that's a little bit about me. Please do feel free to ask some questions in the chat box, and Michael is going to facilitate that.
Definitely got questions.
Okay, cool. All right.
Thanks, Naz. That's fantastic. In fact, another one just came in. Let me just whack it on my list. Really interesting, and I think very relevant to us as an audience and myself as a parent as well. So let me kick off the questions, and I invite everyone again to post your questions to the Q&A button, and I'll forward them through. Could you please name 4 things, skills or tools that you'd recommend to a VI teenager required to cope and succeed in post-school life?
I will, but before I say that, I do just want to say how excited I am. A name of a teacher who I adore has just popped up on the screen. So Prue Jobling, hello. And can I also just apologize in advance? My husband is currently renovating our bathroom. So if there's any noise, I'm really sorry. The perils of working at home in lockdown. Okay, 4 things. This is really hard. Because there's so many things I could say. But if I had to boil it down, really it's, okay, first thing is to take responsibility and to work really hard, because, in a sense, you are the one that has to make things happen. Secondly, not to be afraid to reach out for support, whether that be from a teacher or a parent or whoever it might be. Just don't be afraid, because that's what people are there for. That is what support is there for. Thirdly, I think it's really important to put yourself out there. If you're too afraid to sort of go and ask for opportunities, then how on earth can you expect them just to fall in your lap? They're not going to. So put yourself out there. And lastly, and I think it's probably the most important, to remember that you always deserve you deserve opportunities. And to always remember that, because I think, it's not easy. Times do get really tough. And like my experience with, discrimination, it can be really hard to navigate. And so just to know that you always deserve opportunities. And I think that keeps people going more than anything else.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's, if people make you stop losing belief in yourself, then that has more impact than anything else in life, doesn't it?
Yeah, definitely. I'm noticing all these names pop up of people that that have been in my life forever. Nicola Riling's another one. This is very, very exciting.
We've got a pile of love for you right now. Okay, I've got some more questions. Now, how was your experience in mainstream school compared to special school?
Look, they were both great for what they offered at the time. I think the special school at the time, the teachers were brilliant. They, I had some of the greatest support there. It was a brilliant start. And it really gave me an opportunity to kind of take, I guess, it's hard to look back now and think about how I felt as a, 3.5, 4-year-old, but I think it really did give me the opportunity to meet other people who, had similar experiences to me, similar sort of challenges. And I guess we could, particularly for the parents, they could kind of talk and get to know each other, and, we could navigate things together. But I think for me, I'm a big advocate for mainstream education. I think that education is where everything starts. And if you are a non-disabled person and you look around your classroom and you can see people who are deaf or blind or have cerebral palsy or whatever it is, then it's normalized. You're there, you play with them, you learn with them, you chat to them. And then when you graduate school, you go to uni with them. And then if you're a manager, you employ them, or you are a colleague of theirs, or, whatever it might be. So I'm a big advocate for mainstream education. I think there was just, unfortunately, a particular experience for me early on in the mainstream education, which kind of left a bit of a sour taste in my mouth, but it was one teacher, it was one bad egg. And, things changed for the better after that. And, I'm really grateful for that. So I think, for me, there's no regrets. Mainstream education was always the way to go.
Awesome. Okay, we've got more flooding in. So first of all, Naz, thank you so much for sharing your experience. You're an inspiration. What would you say to parents out there about encouraging independence in their child with vision impairment?
Yeah, so the one thing I will say is that my parents have never wrapped me up in cotton wool. I had to learn to cook and clean like my siblings, like my cousins. I always had to participate in every kind of different event or family holiday, or even if things that I thought were scary or didn't want to do, I had to do it. And I think that's really made me not only independent, but really strong person. I think it's so important, because you don't realize it at the time, but if you are doing everything for your children, what's going to happen when you're not there? How are they going to know when they get on the wrong train, which happened to me a million times? How are they going to be able to figure out what to do and how to ask for help and how to navigate those little challenges that everybody experiences if you just constantly do it for them? And I think, also, you want to be mum or dad. Like, there are people out there, I've had O&M instructors, I've had occupational therapists, I had support teachers. There's a lot of incredible people out there who can do different roles and play different roles in your child's life. And that is what they are trained and paid to do. And you should be taking their advice And also making sure, it's not just about taking their advice, but it's also about making sure that you pick the right people, picking people who your children click with. I've had a bunch of O&M instructors, and, the ones who stand out are the ones that I'm still really good mates with now. And it's things like that as well, finding people who your children want to spend time with and who enjoy, their company and things like that.
Yeah. Okay, I've got some more. I'm going to try and squeeze them in. Now, with all the changes in legislation, do you feel that barriers still exist with employment of disabled people?
Oh, yeah. Employment is one of the biggest barriers that people still face. It still is. Only 2 weeks ago, I did a story about a survey that Vision Australia had done of 1,000 employers, and 92% of them said that they'd never considered employing someone who was blind or had low vision. Now, in 2021, that's disgusting. So I still think we have a really long way to go. I think a lot of organizations have goodwill. I think they want to do the right thing. I don't think they know how. And I guess what I'd also say to that is, how can you expect them to know how if they've never had anyone with disability in their organization? So the way that, for example, my colleagues worked with me 10 years ago is completely different to the way they worked with me now. 10 years ago, it wasn't that they did anything wrong, they just didn't know. And in a sense, we had to figure out all these different things together. We had to find the technology. We had to figure out what ways I would work and what stories that I would go out on to make sure I was safe and all those sorts of things. Whereas now, I've supported the teams and we've written awareness training. We have so many people with lived experience of disability who work in our organization. And that is how you make change. And I don't think there's anything wrong with businesses saying, we want to do this, but we don't know how. We need someone to show us, because, as it is, you just don't know what you don't know. And I think it's really about trying to put people on a path and letting them ask questions in a respectful way, of course, but always putting people with lived experience at the center of the training and at the center of any questions, and making sure that if you want a successful workplace, that it's a diverse workplace. It's as simple as that.
Yeah. Okay, I've got about 7 questions queued, but we're going to run out of time, so I'll ask one more question.
I've spoken too much. That's what happens.
No. This is we're here to hear you talk, so this is fantastic. I've got to say personally, having had you in my life through TV and radio for the last 10 years,
I sat in your living room. Only you were one of the first stories that we did on audio description. I came and interviewed your little girls. I remember.
You excited my daughters no end. You've got 2 little fans still today. So here we go. Here's the question. This is from Jessica. I have an adult student with vision impairment who's only recently acquired vision loss. This student has no training in assistive technologies, but they've got amazing employability skills, however, reliant on having a support person at all times. I don't believe this will be allowed in the workplace. Is that correct? And there's just one last bit to it. The support staff aren't specialists in assistive tech, and I feel they're not helping them learn this tech, and they'll be overlooked in employment. We are rural. What's your feedback? And I suppose also who can help?
So the first thing I'd say is, does this person actually need the support person there? And if they don't, we need to look at, well, how can we eliminate the person? We need to be finding the right training so that this person can work independently. And in terms of support people, it's actually not the case that they can't be in a workplace. We have had people on contracts, for example, who have needed support workers to be with them. And there are ways to do that. And I can provide a bit more advice on that sort of from an individual perspective off the call, because it does sort of go into NDIS plans and extra bits and pieces. But I think what I'd say is, does this person need that support person there? And if they do, fine, there are ways around it. But I think as much as possible, it's just about being honest about what the person needs, what their reasonable adjustments look like. And reasonable adjustments, I would say, is it's something that's being talked about more and more. A lot of organizations that I work with in terms of consultancy type work, they are starting to write these policies around reasonable adjustments and supports. And it is very new, and it's an area that people are slowly learning about. But it is emerging as something that businesses are looking at more and more. And I think just reach out to different organizations. So if it's a tech issue that you're finding with this student, well, let's all put our heads together and figure out, well, where can we get the training and support for this person to learn so that they can work more independently?